What's up, everybody? Welcome to the video. Chris Pinnell here, breaking down my final thoughts for Week 6 of the NFL season for DraftKings and FanDuel. We're going game by game, breaking it all down, talking cash games, tournaments, and stacks, and then running the optimizer at the end to see which players are populating the most as of right now. And if I sound funnier than normal, it's because I'm very sick, so I apologize for that. But if all the rest earlier sounded good to you, do me a favor, make sure you leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel for brand new. Let's dive right into it. And really quick, if you like what you see on the screen behind me today, it is all available at my website I built myself, cpendfs.com. Tons of content there for the classic main slate and flagship showdowns each and every single weekend. Just tons of data, projections, and of course the optimizer. And also the first 7 days are free. All right, so let's go game by game, breaking this down. Now I'm going to go in depth on every single player, every single team, because it's boring. I don't want to do it. You don't want to listen to it. So we're going to keep it short, sweet, and simple. If there's things I don't like, we'll kind of just lightly gloss over it. But we're going to have the Rams facing off versus the Baltimore Ravens on the road, 44.5 point over under in this one. And it is a darn shame that Lamar Jackson is not going to suit up. He's not officially out yet, but he has not practiced this week. All signs point to him being out. So we have Cooper Rush there, $4,500 with an 11-point projection. But the main interest here would be the Los Angeles Rams. And the reason I say it's a shame that Lamar Jackson is not playing is because this would probably be one of the absolute best games to target this weekend across the entire board on both sides. But you take Lamar Jackson out of the Baltimore Ravens offense, and obviously they're just not going to have the point potential that they would on a typical weekly basis. And we're talking about an 18.5 implied team total for Baltimore. If Lamar Jackson is playing, we have to assume it's probably close to a pick'em versus the Los Angeles Rams. So I don't really have any interest on Baltimore. Of course, if you want to do a run back option, if you are stacked on the Rams, you could do that with Zay Flowers if you want, or Mark Andrews, but I personally just don't really want to. I'm fine with the Rams on slots and don't really have to force a run back. Matthew Stafford the past couple of weeks has been amazing through the air. Looks like prime Peyton Manning out there. They did drop the game versus the San Francisco 49ers due to a Kyren Williams fumble, but still a great fantasy day across the board here. And I like pretty much everybody. If you are stacking with Matthew Stafford, I'd highly recommend just double stacking. If you are playing him, play Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. I think it's pretty simple as that. Puka Nacua has been incredible this year. A near 25-point projection is very difficult to do for a wide receiver. Puka has done it. I believe his receiving yards prop this week is sitting right around 100 yards. I am projected for 110. So, I mean, yeah, if you got the money for Puka, by all means, play him. And then to flip the script, if you don't go with the passing game, you got to like Kyren Williams. The Baltimore Ravens defense has just not been that great this year. They're bleeding points to pretty much everybody. So I love Kyren. I like the volume we saw last week after the Blake Corum fumble. Now, of course, if he doesn't fumble, maybe we see more Blake Corum. And also Kyren Williams, they kind of fumbled the game away. So that may be something to worry about. But at $6,300, if we're going to project for 15 plus touches, I think he's an excellent play. And then maybe the DFS game of the week. There's a couple of other good games here, but I am very interested in this one across the board. On both sides, 49.5 point over under, 3-point spread in Carolina. Would I prefer this to be in the Jerry Dome? Of course, but Dak Prescott and the Cowboys offense still had a great day on the road in MetLife last week. 27.5 implied team total, which is one of the highest on the entire slate. And actually, I do believe it is the second highest currently, at least based off the odds I scraped. They're slightly above the Patriots, and they are 1 point below the Indianapolis Colts, who we're going to talk about next. But you got to like everybody here. Now, there's a couple of injury situations we do have to monitor. Cavonte Turpin is going to be out most likely, I believe. I think he's still currently listed as questionable, but I want to say I read a quote where he said he's not going to be available this week, and it looks like CeeDee Lamb is also very doubtful to play in this one. So that's what my assumption is of right now, but that, of course, could change. But Dak went off last week. Javonte Williams went off versus the New York Jets. It was just pretty much great all around. George Pickens ended up getting a late touchdown, a pretty big one, too. I want to say like 40, 45 yards. But with the assumption those guys are out, I mean, $6,500 for Dak. Pickens is at $6,800. The price does come up, but he is Dak's wide receiver one on this team that will want to throw the football. They play at a fast pace, and I don't really see that changing here versus Carolina. I know their defense has been better than seasons past, but I'm still not going to shy away here. And it looks like Vegas really isn't too concerned. And Jake Ferguson is probably the clear-cut top tight end on the slate due to his price point and just how many targets and receptions he's getting on a weekly basis currently, especially without CeeDee Lamb. So you got to love him in cash games. George Pickens is viable. I really like Javonte Williams. We're talking nearly a 20-point projection at $6,400. He gets plenty of volume, nearly 20 touches per game. A little bit used in the passing game too, and gets goal line work. Absolutely no reason not to like him. And then on the Carolina side of things, these guys are a little bit cheaper, but excellent matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. They are been horrible versus wide receivers and quarterbacks this year. So if you want to go with a cheap stack to be able to afford guys like Puka Nacua and Christian McCaffrey this weekend, this is definitely a team I would have a little bit of interest in. Bryce Young $4,800, projecting for nearly 17 fantasy points. That's pretty good on a point per dollar basis, and Cowboys are allowing the most points per game to quarterbacks and allowing the most points per game to wide receivers. So enter Ted McMillan as a very interesting option at $6,000. Like to finally get him into the end zone at some point. It looks like Jalen Coker could return this week. It is not official. He's going to be a game time decision, but if he does end up showing up, he could slot into a top 3 role at the position. And then we don't know about the tight end situation. Currently, Jatavian Sanders is going to be questionable. If he happens to be out, you get a cheaper option in Tommy Tremble. If he happens to be in, he's not really breaking the bank either, but I pretty much like everybody in this game. Might be a little bit lower on Rico Dowdle compared to last week because he's nearly $6,000 and he's just not going to run for 200 yards every single weekend. So I do prefer the passing attack here, but this is a great game to target. All right, I want to go over to the stack tool really quick because I do think the Panthers are visually showing you that they are fairly decent value this week. I'm not saying they're my favorite stack, but let's head over to DraftKings here and we'll scroll down to the table. And what I like to do is I like to sort this by team salary versus implied team total. Because if you can get a team in the left quadrant here, which means they are a cheaper team overall and they have a higher implied team total, if you have a higher implied team total, you're typically going to score more fantasy points because how do you score fantasy points? By getting near the end zone, scoring points, getting yards. So this is where I kind of like to look. And the Carolina Panthers are toeing the line. They're in there, but their price points, I think that's excellent. The Jacksonville Jaguars, Tampa Bay Buccaneers with all their injuries, they're nearly in that left quadrant. The New England Patriots, a team that we'll have to talk about in a little bit. Drake May sims very well for me this week. I know we just got done talking about the Cowboys. A little bit more expensive, but they do look pretty solid. If we look at the team total versus projection, the Carolina Panthers, where you want to be in the right quadrant here, like these are the teams basically everyone's going to want to stack this week for the most part. I mean, the Cowboys are there, the Rams, the Chargers, who we're going to have to talk about, Seahawks, Jaguars, Carolina Panthers. CMC's kind of just breaking the 49ers here because everybody else doesn't look super appealing, but I do think it is kind of fun to look at. All right, moving on to the next game, the Cardinals on the road in Indy, 47.5 point over under in this one. The Colts do find themselves as touchdown favorites, and the highest implied team total of the week at 28.5. I'll be honest though, I don't really love this game. There's other places that I do like to target on this slate. I mean, Daniel Jones is fine. He's probably going to get you anywhere from 17 to 20 fantasy points at 6K. It's okay, a little bit of rushing upside. Jonathan Taylor has been a beast this season, and if he continues to see the volume that he has gotten this year, good chance he gets to around 100 yards and gets into the end zone maybe once or twice. CMC is still my favorite spend-up option just due to the passing game. You're getting a wide receiver 1 and an RB1 volume-wise. I know the production hasn't been there on the ground, but through the air, it is unmatched. I mean, nearly $10,000 on FanDuel, a little bit over that, $8,500 on DraftKings. He's an excellent option. He's the RB2 this week, but I do have CMC a little bit higher. And then Tyler Warren, he has been awesome. I don't really think DraftKings has priced him up enough to where he's not going to be a solid value. I do prefer Ferguson at a similar price point, but outside of that, don't really like anything else. Kyler Murray, he did not practice this week until today, I believe, and he is going to give it a go. I get kind of a weird injury last week. Didn't really look like he hurt himself too much, but outside of that, no real interest. Trey McBride projects well every single week, but I do think a slight discount on Jake Ferguson makes more sense. All right, moving on to this game in Jacksonville, we have Seattle on the road, 47.5 point over under, 1.5 point spread. Basically a pick 'em here, both teams with a 24.5 implied team total. I'll be honest, I mean, it looks like a good game for real life purposes, but not real sure how much interest I'm going to have for DFS purposes. Of course, I like JSN. He is not priced up enough on DraftKings yet. $7,600, I think he should probably be around $85. FanDuel, he's at $9,000, so it definitely looks less appealing, especially since it's half point PPR. But if you want to play JSN in cash games, continue to do so. You're getting a nice floor, you're getting a nice ceiling, because it's not like you're sacrificing one or the other. Sometimes these guys with high targets, they're not going to have those high ceilings, but they make up for it for the receptions. No, he does everything. He's absolutely incredible. One of the best wide receivers in the game, and for fantasy, he has been elite this year. Don't really have interest in the running backs. Not really going to play Sam Darnold. I mean, maybe in stacks you'll get there. Sam Darnold, JSN. I'm not really sure if you're going to want to double stack with it. Maybe you throw in a Barner. Hopefully he does. Hope he does what he did last week, but I don't think that's something you can count on a weekly basis. And you can run it back with somebody on Jacksonville if you're looking really cheap. Hunter Long at $2,500. You also have Johnny Mundit. Not going to be any Brenton Strange. He is on the IR. But other than that, really for me, the targets in this game are JSN by a lot. And then maybe some stabs of Hunter Long if you're looking for a cheap flyer. And we have a pretty fun game here, one that's very easily stackable at these price points. Where the Chargers on the road in Miami at Hard Rock. 44.5 point over under, 4.5 point spread in the Chargers' favor. even though they have dropped 2 games in a row, one to the New York Giants, although that doesn't look as bad now after they just took out the Philadelphia Eagles by a lot at home. But Justin Herbert projects as my QB1 on the week. That doesn't mean he's my absolute favorite quarterback, but at $6,300, he's definitely a pretty easy guy to get to. No Omar and Hampton, so we're going to have the attack of Hassan Haskins and Vidal. And they're kind of, I mean, they're not 4K, so it's not their values. I mean, they're okay. I mean, Miami did just get absolutely shredded by Rico Dowdle last week, but I do prefer Herbert in the passing attack in this one. I know the offensive line's in ruins and it's been bad, but if you're ever going to get right, I mean, it's definitely versus Miami's defense. And take your pick at wide receiver, QJ, Keenan Allen, Ladd McConkey. That's my interest in that order. Can't really trust the tight end position on this team, but I really like the Justin Herbert double stacks this week. Just take your pick at the wide receiver position. Very easy matchup versus Miami. Been horrible versus quarterbacks this year. And as for the Miami side of things, I'm kind of viewing them as run back options. So if you want to use Devon Chan at $700, you can do that. The volume's going to be there. The pass catching upside, kind of like a light version of CMC. Not that he's horrible. He only projects like 5 points worse, but definitely not quite up to CMC standards. And then Jalen Waddle with no Tyreek Hill had a great game last week. Nice touchdown. And at 15.4 points at $6,100, that does make him an elite play. The price did come up a little bit, but it's still a very solid play nonetheless. And then Darren Waller, he doesn't block. He basically plays wide receiver on that team. So pretty much the wide receiver too, I guess. At 4K, he's looked good when he's been on the field, which is kind of crazy considering he was rapping just a couple of years ago. But at 4K, he is definitely an option. And yeah, we have Cleveland on the road in Pittsburgh, 37.5 point over under. No, thank you. If you're going to play anybody, I would say the Browns defense does look pretty solid at their price point. All right, New England on the road in the Superdome, New Orleans, some call it the Coors Field of the NFL. But I do have some interest in Drake May here. 45.5 point over under, 3.5 point spread in this one. Honestly, not a bad game. I think it's got some sneaky upside here. Drake May, $5,900. He projects pretty well, not too far after Justin Herbert for me. He would be an excellent pivot option, but if you are playing Drake May, he does run the ball a little bit, so you don't necessarily have to double stack with him, but I do think single stacks are perfectly fine, whether you want to go Stephon Diggs or Hunter Henry, or both. I'm not rolling out a double stack. I'm just saying you don't necessarily have to because he's a little bit mobile. Antonio Gibson went down, so it's going to be the Stevenson fumble show, and then we'll see if Trayvon Henderson can beg variable enough to maybe sniff the field a couple of times. On New Orleans, this would just strictly be run back options, and for me, that is basically just Chris Olave. Of course, Shaheed could catch that random bomb. He did it last week, but it's not something you can count on a weekly basis. Taysom Hill did come back last week. He's a gadget player, and he's very annoying for this offense. And then, of course, Jawan Johnson is an option too. But for me, if I am playing this game, I would probably go Drake May, Stephon Diggs, Hunter Henry, running back, whether Chris Olave or Rashid Shaheed, if I want to. Another kind of nasty game here where I don't really have much interest in either team. 41.5 point over under with the Titans on the road in Las Vegas. 4.5 point spread in the Raiders' favor. Geno Smith has been a turnover machine this year. I do not mind the Titans' defense at their price points at all. I wish they were at home, but I'm not going to complain too much. If I am playing anybody else besides the defense in this one, I would say Ashton Genty at $1,600 and $8K on FanDuel would be the option I get to. Should be a somewhat favorable game script for Genty in the rushing attack here. And as bad as Geno Smith has been, they really got to lean on Genty, so I don't think he's a horrible option, but definitely not a priority for me with how many good running backs we have on this slate. Okay, we kind of got a fun game here. 47.5 point over under. We're going to be at Tampa Bay. San Francisco will be on the road. Somehow took off the Los Angeles Rams last week, down the entire team. They might be slightly healthier this week if Jennings plays, but it looks like Pearsall is going to be out. Jennings is still questionable, so that's going to be a bit of a guessing game. But even if Jennings is out, I mean, they've shown that next man up. That is the motto in San Francisco, and it tends to work. Brock Purdy not going to be in for this game. So Mac Jones, maybe Kendrick Bourne as the wide receiver one again at 5K. I would certainly have interest there if Juwan Jennings is out. I mean, he hyper-targeted him, and we saw it last year with Mac Jones in Jacksonville, where he was able to produce really big games with BTJ. But I think the man of the hour here is Chris McCaffrey in San Francisco. He's going to be the highest projected player on this slate. He still probably isn't expensive enough. I think at the very least, McCaffrey needs to be 9K because you're getting two players. You're getting a guy that can get 15 carries on the ground and 10 plus targets through the air. And while he has not been efficient on the ground, who cares if we're getting 10 plus targets? The man has been awesome, high reception rate. And yeah, the floor is unmatched by anybody. He has not been getting rushing touchdowns, horribly inefficient, but at some point, those are going to happen. And if we're looking at Tampa Bay, Baker Mayfield, $6,600. He projects, I believe, as QB2 or QB3 on this slate. I believe it's Drake May, Baker Mayfield, and Justin Herbert for me. But there is a ton of injuries on this offense. No Bucky Irving, no Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin. So it actually, even though Ibuka is kind of expensive, if you are trying to double stack with Baker Mayfield, it's kind of easy to do so because you have Sterling Shepard as wide receiver 2. He doesn't project bad at all for that price point. You do have to assume Cade Otton's probably going to bump in targets this week. And with no Bucky Irving, Rachaad White being the RB1 of this team, he'll get checkdowns. And his projection at that price point still makes him a fairly good play. So I like a lot of guys in this game. We're still going to have to kind of wait on the news for Jennings. If he happens to be out, you got to bump Bourne. If he happens to be in, I still think both are playable, but Christian McCaffrey still is the man of that offense. And of course, Jake Tonjes at $3,700 will be an option because if he gets into the end zone, you'll be happy. If not, it'll probably be a pretty midday. Okay, let's finish this off with the most lopsided projected game on the slate. 44.5 point over under. The Bengals are on the road in Lambeau. 2 touchdown favorites. The Packers find themselves as 30.5 implied team total. Also the highest. I misspoke earlier when I said the Indianapolis Colts. I've just kind of forgotten about this game just due to it being at the late point. And then, yeah, the Green Packers do the highest implied team total. Only issue is, like I said, very big spread here. We'll talk about the Bengals first. They made a quarterback change. They have been putrid, although Jake Browning did show them some life at the end of the Detroit Lions game. And if you play Jamar Chase, you're probably pretty happy by the end of the day. Big long touchdown, got to the end zone twice. But Joe Flacco is in town to save the season. And yeah, this is basically elderly abuse. I mean, he's been awful against pressure this year. So he goes from the Cleveland Browns line, a ton of pressure this year. And then he goes to the Cincinnati Bengals. And the weapons around him are much better, but it doesn't matter if you can't block and give Joe Flacco time because he is the least mobile quarterback in the entire league. Maybe we get a slight bump to Chase Brown here because Joe Flacco has shown the tendency to dump it off to running backs this year. And if he is under pressure, it could be a safety valve for Flacco. But some big news here is that Jamar Chase is currently questionable now with an illness. I don't know if he's just kind of throwing the towel in at this point, but if he's in, sure, maybe they're going to be throwing the ball at the end of the game. I don't really see any interest on Cincinnati at all, so I'll probably be passing there. For Green Bay, Josh Jacobs is going to be the more cashy option. I mean, as a 2 touchdown favorite at home with the high implied team total and the best odds to score the entire slate, yeah, Josh Jacobs looks pretty good. If you want to take the tournament approach, you'll play the passing game here with Jordan Love. I mean, he doesn't project that much different than guys like Baker, Drake May, and Justin Herbert on this slate. I don't think the ownership will be as high. It's just kind of tough to really project who to stack them with. Of course, Tucker Kraft's the safest option, but outside of that, is it going to be a Dobbs week? Is it actually going to be a Golden week? Wicks, Malik Heath, Savion Williams? I don't know. Good luck figuring that out. So that'll be the lower owned approach, but Josh Jacobs definitely looks like the best option. And as promised, we'll head over to the optimizer here and just kind of run some very basic settings to see which players are popping. Of course, I won't have the same projections as everybody else in the industry, but we'll have some randomness, and I can't imagine I'm going to be too far off. So we're going to run a quick 150 here. We're going to add 25% randomness, which is a lot. But again, like I said, we're accounting for just a lot of variance, and other guys are going to have different projections. I'm not going to mess with max player ownership per player in there or the sum. I am going to do this 2 stack minimum with 1 stack bring back option. Now, of course, if I am trying to actually build 150 here and take more time to build, I'm going to put team specific rules. For if I have more of a mobile quarterback, I'll maybe make it to at least 1 instead of 2. For example, if I don't like anybody on the other team, maybe say like Baltimore and Los Angeles, I won't force a run back option, but we're not going to do that in this one. So just a fair warning. And then we're going to run it without stacking options to see which kind of changes it, which will be more like the cashy options, or at least the guys that I like, because my projections, of course, are going to be somewhat different. So let's run 150 here and we'll see which players are coming in. Head over to quarterback here and let me get my head out of the way. And I'm not surprised about Baker Mayfield being so high with the double stacks because projections really like Ibuka this week. And then guys like Sterling Shepard are very cheap. Cade Otton, just some of the other stacking options. I gotta be honest, I'm a little concerned with all the Spencer Rattler I am seeing. He's not really someone I've been on, but I'm guessing it's a combination of the game that it likes and the price tag. But yeah, that's a lot of Rattler, which looks disgusting. Drake May going up there. So it really likes that New England and New Orleans game, which it does have a decent total and a tighter spread. So it's like it's the craziest thing in the world. Daniel Jones, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, I thought might be a little bit higher. Kyler Murray and Sam Darnold. Curious to see what running backs looks like. A lot of Javonte Williams, CMC, Rachaad White, Kyron Williams. That makes a lot of sense. 4 main guys that I would expect. A lot of Rico Dowdle, which I wasn't expecting. Josh Jacobs is up there. NHN, which doesn't make sense. Wide receiver, Ibuka, Puka, Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs. A lot of Marvin Harrison. I'm assuming that's when it's trying to do the double stack with Kyler Murray. So, like I said, when you take off the guys that force double stacks, like I'm not going to force a double stack with Kyler Murray. So you'll probably see Marvin Harrison go way down and then probably just kind of focus on Trey McBride. But Ted McMillan, Sterling Shepard with all those Baker stacks, JSN, Keenan Allen, tight ends, Jake Ferguson, Juwan Johnson, Trey McBride. Juwan Johnson's just because it jammed in so much Spencer Rattler, which is horrible. Titans defense, we talked about them. Packers, Dolphins, surprisingly pretty high. But I do understand it with the Chargers line, which might not be a horrible way to go in tournaments because Justin Herbert will have some ownership. And it looks like Dallas, Tampa Bay, San Francisco, Los Angeles are the highest teams there. And we got some of the lineups in there. But I'm going to run this without the stacking options and kind of see how much this changes. And hopefully we don't see as much Spencer Rattler this time. And you have to remember we are running 25% randomness as well. But let's go back to the exposures here. And yeah, not seeing as much, but he is still kind of high. My assumption is now that I think about it more, is it really likes CMC, it really likes Puka Nacua. And how are we going to be able to afford that? Quarterbacks that have cheap stacks. And of course, Rattler's very cheap. Bryce Young is very cheap. So I'm assuming that's why we're seeing those guys pop up so much. It does make more sense to me now. But Bryce Young actually simulated as my highest quarterback there in this 150 run. Drake May, who we talked about, Trevor Lawrence, Spencer Rattler. QB is pretty spread out this week. I mean, there's no Lamar Jackson on the slate. There's no Jalen Hurts. There's no Patrick Mahomes. So it kind of looks just like a horrible week at the quarterback position. But yeah, Bryce Young did lead the way, but I get it with the matchup. Javonte Williams, there's 50% CMC. So that's another reason why I think we are getting these cheaper quarterbacks. Rashad White, Kyron Williams, basically my top 4 this week. Jacobs maybe a little bit lower, but not as much pass catching upside. So I guess I get it. Puka Nacua at the very top. So yeah, when you're trying to get Puka Nacua and CMC in half your lineups, you got to find some value on this slate. So it does make sense. Sterling Shepard, Buka, Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Ted McMillan, Waddle, Pickens, JSN, no surprise there. Jake Ferguson absolutely leading the way there, nearly half the lineups. And then I don't think anything will change at the defensive position. So yeah, there we have it. Kind of a weird week. I don't necessarily agree with all the things projections say sometimes, and this is maybe one of those weeks where I might get a little bit different off of them, but of course that's up to personal preference for anybody else. But that's all I have for this week's video, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, or even if you didn't, make sure you leave a like down below. Scratch that for brand new. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Wish you the best, and I'll see y'all next time.